Somewhere in Africa, more than 100,000 years ago, a sound left a human mouth that had never been made before. Not a grunt, not a scream, something else, something with intention behind it, something meant to be understood by another mind. We will never know what that sound was. No fossil record sound. No cave wall preserves a voice. There is no archaeological layer you can dig through and find, carefully preserved, the first word a human being ever spoke. And yet, scientists have spent decades trying to answer this impossible question anyway. Linguists, geneticists, anthropologists, all chasing something that technically cannot be found. So this isn't a video where I tell you the answer. Nobody can. This is a video where we go looking for it anyway, because the search itself turns out to be one of the strangest investigations in all of science. Here's how seriously science used to take this question. In 1866, the Linguistic Society of Paris got so exhausted by wild theories about the origin of language that they issued a formal ban. No papers on the subject would be accepted ever again. For over a century, this question was treated the way physicists treat perpetual motion machines, a career-ending waste of time. Then genetics arrived, neuroscience matured, primate research got serious, and suddenly scientists had actual tools to investigate a question that used to be pure guesswork. So where do you even start looking for something that left no trace? You start with the body. Before there were words, there had to be a mouth and a throat capable of making them. Your voice box sits lower in your throat than it does in almost any other primate on Earth. Chimpanzees, gorillas, our closest living relatives, have a larynx position much higher up. A lower larynx means a longer vocal tract. Any longer vocal tract means room to shape air into distinct, controlled sounds, vowels, consonants, the raw material of speech. For a long time, researchers assumed this was uniquely ours. Then in 2019, a study on Neanderthal remains found something that upended that assumption. Their hyoid bone, the small bone that anchors the tongue and throat muscles, was structurally almost identical to yours. Not ape-like, human-like. Neanderthals split from our lineage roughly 600,000 years ago, and the bone suggests they may have been talking in some form, long before Homo sapiens even existed. Having the equipment to speak and actually speaking are two different things, though. A piano sitting in a room isn't making music. Something has to play it, and that something might be a single gene. In the 1990s, researchers began studying a family in London known simply as the KE family. Across 3 generations, half of them had a severe inherited speech disorder, not a hearing problem, not an intelligence problem. Something specific to language itself was broken. Geneticists traced it to one gene, FOXP2. Almost every mammal on Earth carries a version of this gene. Mice have it. Chimpanzees have it. But the human version carries 2 tiny mutations no other primate has. And a tiny change in one gene may be one of the reasons you can hold a conversation while a chimpanzee never will. Here's the part that still gives researchers chills. When scientists sequenced Neanderthal DNA, they found the same human-specific mutations sitting right there in their genome too. So by this point, we've built something real. We know roughly when the equipment for speech was ready. We know there's a genetic switch that flipped somewhere in that same deep window of time. What we still don't know is what anyone actually said with it. At first, scientists thought this part of the mystery could never be solved. There was no evidence left to examine. Then they found 3 completely different clues, hidden in 3 completely different places. One in the way apes communicate, one in the way babies learn to speak, and one in the sounds every human on Earth makes without ever being taught. 3 clues, 3 competing theories about how it all began. Let's go through them. Theory 1. Language didn't start with sound at all. It started with hands. This is called the gestural theory, and it has serious researchers behind it, most notably psychologist Michael Corballis, who argued that early hominins communicated primarily through gesture long before vocal language took over, pointing at something, mimicking an action. These require none of the fine vocal control that spoken words demand. A chimpanzee can point at a banana and be understood instantly. It cannot say the word banana. It doesn't need to. There's supporting evidence here that it's honestly a little unsettling. A bonobo named Kanzi, raised in a research environment at Georgia State University, learned to communicate using a symbol board with hundreds of symbols and could even respond correctly to spoken sentences he'd never heard before. Kanzi never learned to speak. His vocal anatomy physically cannot produce our sounds, but the underlying capacity for symbolic communication, this gesture means that thing, was clearly already there. If our ancestors were doing something similar, then technically the first word might not have been spoken at all. It might have been a movement of the hand. Theory 2 pushes back hard against that. Vocal sounds came first, and earlier than most people assume. Researchers studying infant development found something striking. In their first year of life, babies produce far more speech-like babbling than meaningful gestures. Long before a baby points at something, they're experimenting relentlessly with sound. Some researchers argue this echoes something deep in our evolutionary history, that vocal experimentation isn't a shortcut. It's an ancient, wired-in drive. There's also a brutally practical argument. Gesture has a massive limitation. You cannot gesture to someone in the dark. You cannot gesture behind you. You cannot gesture while your hands are full of a spear, a child, or the meat you just carried 3 kilometers back to camp. Voice works in the dark, around corners at a distance, hands free. For a species constantly on the move with its hands full, the pressure to develop hands-free communication would have been enormous. Theory 3 sits somewhere in between, and it might be the most human of all three. Language began with sounds that weren't words in the modern sense, but raw emotional bursts, what linguists call interjections. Sounds that show up in some form in nearly every language on Earth and seem to bypass grammar entirely and connect straight to feeling. A sharp intake of breath when something startles you, an involuntary "oh" when you're surprised. These require no learning. Babies make them. Even people born deaf who never hear a single spoken word still produce similar vocal bursts in moments of extreme emotion. Some researchers believe these primal sounds are the true seed of vocal language, a bridge between the alarm calls of other primates and everything we eventually built on top of them. Now picture this for a second. A dark cave, a fire burning low, 2 humans sitting across from each other. Tens of thousands of years before either theory has a name, one of them looks at the other, opens his mouth, nothing. Silence. Then something. A single sound, deliberate, aimed at another mind, meant to mean something. This may have been the single most important sound ever made by a living thing on this planet. And whoever made it had no idea. They weren't trying to invent language. They were just trying to be understood right then, in that moment. So 3 theories. Gesture first, voice first, emotion first, and honestly, no consensus on which one got there before the others. But there's a slightly different question that might be more answerable. Not how the first word was made, what it was probably about. Danger is the obvious candidate. Living in small groups on an open savanna, surrounded by predators that could kill you in seconds, the single most valuable thing you could communicate was threat. Right now, act immediately. Vervet monkeys actually have distinct alarm calls for different predators. One specific call for eagles, a different one for leopards, a different one for snakes, and other monkeys respond differently depending on which call they hear. That's not noise. That's a specific sound tied to a specific meaning in a species that isn't even human. If a monkey can do that, our ancestors almost certainly could too. Long before anything resembling a sentence existed, food is the second obvious candidate. Finding calories in an unpredictable environment was quite literally the difference between living and dying. Found something. Come here. This is safe to eat. Communication like that carried enormous survival value. Then there's the strangest entry on this list. Mama. Linguists have long noticed that something close to the sound ma or mama means mother in an enormous number of completely unrelated languages. Mandarin, Swahili, Spanish, Hindi, Navajo. Languages with no shared ancestry whatsoever, and yet strikingly similar sounds for this one specific idea. The explanation isn't mystical, it's mechanical. The M sound is one of the easiest sounds a human mouth can physically make, just closing and opening the lips while vocalizing. It's often the very first consonant babies babble, completely by accident, long before they understand what they're saying. Parents across every culture on Earth heard that accidental sound and assigned meaning to it, not because babies were naming their mothers on purpose, because it was simply the easiest sound available, and it stuck, which raises a genuinely interesting possibility. What if the first word wasn't invented by an adult with a plan at all? What if it was an accident, a sound an infant made while experimenting with their own mouth that an adult heard, responded to, and reinforced exactly the same way parents do today, completely unaware they might be recreating one of the oldest patterns in our species? There's a fourth candidate, coordination. Early humans very likely hunted and foraged in groups, and group coordination needs basic commands. Come, go, wait. Some researchers see this as an underrated candidate for the earliest vocabulary. Not emotionally compelling, but relentlessly practical. A species that hunts together needs follow me long before it needs to describe a sunset. And finally, naming, which might be the most demanding candidate of all. To name something, a person, a place, an animal, requires understanding that a sound can represent something that isn't isn't physically in front of you. Vervet monkeys can warn about a leopard that's there right now. They cannot tell you about a leopard that was there yesterday or might be there tomorrow. If early humans crossed that line, talking about something that wasn't currently visible, that might be the actual birth of language as we understand it, not a specific word, a specific kind of thought. So here we are, standing at the edge of everything the evidence can actually tell us. And honestly, that edge is the most interesting place to stand. We know the physical hardware for speech was likely ready hundreds of thousands of years ago, possibly shared with Neanderthals. We know there's a genetic switch, FOXP2, tied to fine vocal and grammatical control that took its modern form somewhere in that same deep window of time. We know that whatever the first word was, it almost certainly wasn't a full sentence with grammar the way we think of language today. It was probably closer to a single urgent signal. Danger, food, mother, come. Something immediate, born out of necessity, not curiosity. If you had to bet, which theory do you think is closest to the truth? Hands first, voice first, or something closer to a cry of fear or joy that just happened to catch on? We will never recover the actual sound, not through better technology, not through some undiscovered fossil. Sound doesn't fossilize. The moment it left a mouth, it was gone forever, dissolved into the air of a landscape that no longer exists, heard by people whose names we will never know, in a language that left no written trace because writing itself wouldn't exist for another 100,000 years. There's something almost humbling about that. We can map the human genome. We can look at light from galaxies billions of years old. We can reconstruct entire skeletons from fragments smaller than your thumbnail. And yet the very first thing a human being ever said, arguably the moment that separates us more clearly from every other species on this planet than any tool or fire ever did, is permanently, completely lost. But maybe that's not a loss. Maybe it's the opposite, because somewhere in the world right now, a baby is experimenting with sound for the first time, babbling nonsense syllables with no idea what any of it means. And somewhere close by, an adult is listening, waiting, ready to hear something in that noise and respond to it as if it matters. Mom, da, up. No, that baby has no idea they're recreating one of the oldest events in the history of our species. They're not thinking about evolution or genetics or 100,000 years of prehistory. They're just trying to be understood, which might be exactly what that very first word, whatever it was, whoever said it was actually trying to do. We don't know what it was. We might never know what it was, but somewhere a long, long time ago, someone opened their mouth, made a sound on purpose for the very first time, and someone else understood them. And every word you've said today is still, in some small way, an echo of that.